Okay, everybody, welcome to the beginnings of art. This is an audio lecture, obviously. It'll be a condensed version of what we will do during the rest of the course, where I will show you these slides and talk about them, but not being here. I put it on an audio lecture. You can stop it at any time, play it again as many times as you want, and go over it. So we're going to start with the beginnings of art, and we're going to go chronologically. We're going to look at how did art start, what was it like when it began, what kinds of art were people making, and to give you some sort of perspective. Now the dates are not absolutely crucial, but an understanding of the general sort of time frame is. So human beings, modern human beings, Homo sapiens, appeared somewhere around 200,000 years ago. And about 164,000 years ago they began to exhibit behavior that could barely be described as art, and this was the use of red paint and red pigment. This might have been put on their bodies, it might have been put on tools, but at some level and in some way, about 164,000 years ago, people began to use red paint for symbolic purposes. Now this isn't technically art, but it is the beginning of something more than just hunting for survival. There's some sort of ritualistic or magical aspect to the art. Now, we look at the period of ancient art, we see that there's three broad periods. There's the Upper Paleolithic, and Paleolithic means stone, lithic means stone, so Paleo means old stone, and then Mesolithic is middle stone, and Neolithic is the new stone period. And these dates are general, 40,000 to about 10,000, the Mesolithic, the middle period, 12 to 6, but not something to get too caught up on. Historians, archaeologists, scientists disagree constantly. They're changing these dates. But for our purposes, these two periods are the most important. The Upper Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, is when we began to see paintings, we began to see sculptures. And the Neolithic period is when we find people beginning to live in cultures and societies and cities, and that creates a dramatic change in the art that we're going to see. So we're going to start with the Paleolithic. Typically it's about 2 million to about 10,000 years ago, and it's characterized primarily by stone tools, basic axes and arrowheads, and by a nomadic type of living. So the people would have traveled across Europe following animals, hunting, gathering, and so people didn't stay put. They didn't have houses and forts, and they didn't raise livestock. They were nomadic. They wandered across Africa, they wandered across Europe, and this is really important because when they do stop, things change dramatically, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, in terms of the art, the first real art that we could identify in a way that we understand would be sculpture. There was painting happening at the time, but it was slightly more recent. So we had to say what was the oldest type of art. We probably would have to say sculpture. Now what's interesting is we begin to find things that look like this all over Europe, Eastern Europe and Southern Europe and Northern Africa, that had incredible consistency. These are female figures. The head is there, you can see the arm here, the breasts, the legs, the stomach, and what we find is that these types of things were produced all over the area I just described. There wasn't a great variation. They were always women. They always had no feet. They always had big bellies, large breasts, relatively unimportant heads, and arms. And this is the Venus of Hohlefels, which is the oldest one, somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 BC. They have come to be known as the Venus figurines, Venus being the goddess of feminine beauty and love, and you'll see what I mean in a minute when we look at the next one, the Venus of Kostensky. Similar again, missing legs. Now sometimes they're broken off in this case, but sometimes if we go back, they're actually made this way. They're made often without feet. Again, the breasts are prominent, the stomach, the buttocks. The face is almost blank, almost empty, and then some sort of headdress or hat or hairstyle on the figure, and the arms also kind of insignificant, small, or non-existent. And this one here, this is called the Venus of Willendorf. discovered in Austria, is probably the most famous figure. And she has all the characteristics we just described. The breasts, the stomach, the legs, no feet. These here are the arms. You can see the arms coming over her breasts. And again, no face, and this strange kind of hairdo or hat, whatever it is. I say that because we don't know anything about these figures, really. We don't know why everybody all over the ancient world was making them, why they had such consistency. They were all relatively small. This one, for example, from top to bottom is only 4.5 inches, so they're tiny. They almost all, like I said, didn't have feet and had the features exaggerating the female body. What this means, we can only speculate. What is odd is the fact that so many people over such a diverse geographical area were producing very, very similar objects. One of the classic interpretations is that this represents fertility, that the woman is pregnant, the breasts full of milk, and if you think back of what life must have been like, it was pretty harsh. So the idea of fertility, whether it's the fertility of children, therefore the survival of the people, or the fertility of the land, it would make a lot of sense as being very, very important. Another aspect, besides fertility, is that these objects could have also represented the mother goddess. We know that this time in history, the dominant sort of religious, spiritual, worshipful tradition was primarily matriarchal and probably goddess-centered. So instead of God the Father looking down, it was goddess the Mother looking up. The earth was her body, the food and the crops and the land and the animals came forth from her body, and women basically were in charge of society. They were the matriarchs. So in this sense, it could be a religious icon representing the mother goddess. Another interpretation, a more recent interpretation, is when these figures have been studied, they have been found to have small, tiny pieces of red paint. We talked about red paint earlier, inside the cracks. Questions have arisen as to what this red paint could have signified. Possibly these figures were painted red. And if we look at contemporary primitive cultures, by primitive I don't mean any sort of value judgment, but non-technologically advanced in a technological sense. If we look at these cultures, we also find small female figures painted red, and these are often given to young women as they come of age to ensure their fertility and through the rituals of their menstrual rituals for their culture. So probably they were also seen as magical talismans or objects.